Dear colleagues, we hope that you and your families are well in these difficult times. Thank you very much for being with us in this occasion. On behalf of PULSAR team and the World Bank, and despite the ongoing circumstances, we are happy to welcome you to our first joint PULSAR FOCAL workshop entitled COVID-19 Intervention Assessment Tool. Today is a very special session for us because this is the first joint event organized by PULSAR and FOCAL communities. In addition, our colleagues from Colombia and Georgia are going to present their experience in assessing and managing COVID-19 impact. Unfortunately, our colleague Ed Olowo, our Global Governance Director, had to take a couple of days off from the office, so he will not be able to join us today. I also would like to remind you that all English version presentations are available in the document section of the platform, which you could use on the right side of your screens. The rest of the presentation, meaning the translated presentation, will be available on the PULSAR web page. Without further ado, giving our ambitious agenda, I would like to pass the floor to Daniel Boyce, Practice Manager for the Governments team for the East and Central Asia. Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dimitri. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the World Bank and PULSAR and FOCAL teams, it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this first official joint PULSAR and FOCAL virtual workshop, also known as the Smart Interactive Talks, which has today's topic as COVID-19 Intervention Assessment Tool, which, as you may know, is something that was recently developed and issued by the IPSASB board in collaboration with Zurich University. I'd like to first thank all of you for joining us to be able to attend today, and hope all of you are doing well along with your families. Today's event is a very special event for us because it's the first joint event of the two networks which work on similar topics, and both aiming to promote the use of the best international practices in the field of public sector accounting in their respective regions, ECA and LAC. I was involved in the founding of FOCAL. I remember with Xiomara and others, and Dimitri included. We had the first official meeting in Washington in a very snowy February day where we weren't sure who could attend, but we were able to move on that, which followed an event at the Inter-American Development Bank, which was somewhat similar to this, focusing on a certain topic, and then there were discussions and then meetings and eventually even a legal agreement to found the network. So it's been a pleasure for me to see FOCAL continue to operate since I left the LAC region about 2.5 years ago, and also now to see the PULSAR network to be in an event like this together with FOCAL. Well, the COVID-19 pandemic presents one of the largest challenges to governments that we've seen in the past century. We've seen, first of all, unprecedented fiscal interventions that governments have had to deploy, and at the same time the effect of the pandemic being felt on government finances both immediately and then in the long term. And we are working with governments to try to help them to address the short-term crisis, but also to try to build in some new institutional mechanisms that will help in the medium and long term. Today we'll hear from IFAC on one of the ways that they are helping governments to respond to the crisis. And the main objectives of the workshop are first to present and discuss the approach that are the key and what are the key features of this tool, to exchange some experiences between PULSAR and FOCAL community country members in assessing and reporting on the COVID-19 impact, and then to explore opportunities for the practical use of the new IFAC tool by the PULSAR and FOCAL members. In order to achieve this objective, we have quite a good panel, strong panel of experts with, as Dimitri said, Ed Aloa was not able to attend, but we will have my colleagues, fellow manager in the bank, Xiomara, introducing the event, and then Ross Smith, Program and Technical Director from IPSASB, will present some of the key features and benefits of the tool, as well as Andreas Bergman, who's the Director of Public Sector for the ZHAW School of Management and Law in Switzerland and the former IPSASB chair. He will present and discuss some key elements of the assessment process. Afterwards, David Gamkrelidise and Pedro Borges will share the Georgian and then the Colombian experience with us in terms of assessing and reporting COVID-19 impact on public finances. And then we'll have a short Q&A session chaired and organized by Jose Resk and Juan Carlos Serrano, with some brief closing remarks from Arman Vatian and Srinivas Gurusala on behalf of the PULSAR team. Finally, I'd like to share that on a somewhat separate topic, our PULSAR team, in collaboration with colleagues from global and corporate units in the World Bank, has started working on a new regional initiative focused on improving public debt reporting and transparency processes. And just a few days ago, you should have received it, if you are a PULSAR member, a link to a short questionnaire that will help us to better understand the current situation and the challenges related to the debt reporting and transparency in your countries, which will then lead up to an event that we are planning. The results of this survey will help us a lot in planning that event, which we are hoping to organize for the first week of December. And so please pay attention to that email. Your inputs will be very valuable. And we thank you in advance for your collaboration and participation in that survey, as well as future events that we'll be organizing in the PULSAR network. Thank you again for being with us today. We hope you enjoyed today's event and find it useful for your work, and that it will be also a beginning of a long and productive collaboration between PULSAR and FOCAL families. Back to you, Dimitri. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Now I would like to invite Xiomara Morel, Governance Practice Manager for the region of Latin America and Caribbean, who will be welcoming us on behalf of the FOCAL team.
Good morning, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Dan and Dimitri, for introducing me. I feel like I have been surrounded by my ex-colleagues in LAC, including my ex-manager, Dan, but also by my peers, colleagues, Jose, Dimitri, Juan Carlos, who all have worked together with us on FOCAL at some point in time, as Dan said. It's really a pleasure to see that we had started to make this event of knowledge exchange, not just between the FOCAL and the PULSAR team. I do appreciate a lot that the PULSAR organizing team has invited all the FOCAL team in previous events that PULSAR has, but literally speaking, like Dan said, today is the first time that we organize together to have speakers from our client countries from both regions. So thank you very much, everybody, for that. I do also want to welcome and say hello to the distinguished panelists. I had the pleasure to work with some of them, Andreas in particular, and also Dr. Pedro Luis Borges in Colombia, who will be presenting us the Colombian experience. And although I haven't worked with David, welcome, and I look forward to work with you too in other events. And same thing, I don't know if Ross is joining us. He's there. And welcome, Ross, from the IFAC. This is a long partnership between IFAC, IPSASB, and let's say FOCAL, PULSAR, and the bank, IMF, and IDB to push the agenda on public sector accounting and financial reporting. And I do hope that we can get a lot of accomplished, even if we are working from home these days. So welcome again, and on behalf of the region, especially to my colleagues on FOCAL who are connected in Latin America in different time zones. I know that for some of you, this is actually like making an early start, especially in Central America, but I do hope that it's actually useful and worth to be here today. Let me start by just complementing what Dan said. FOCAL was actually, I would say, launched in 2015 2014 officially in Chile. And this initiative that started actually by the member countries and the bank, IMF and IDB supported, has already had 6 annual events. This year, the event was expected to be in Ecuador, Quito, but due to the pandemic, the event has actually been postponed. And the FOCAL members has been meeting almost every month for different topics and doing their own regular meetings. Hopefully, we will have a chance to invite PULSAR to our next event in face-to-face mode, not just dialogue by virtual. And we do hope that this exchange will actually lead to some joint activities together beyond the knowledge exchange that we are having today. FOCAL actually and PULSAR can benefit from this unprecedented situation, continuing to do this dialogue that we are doing today in a virtual mode. It is proven with all of us here today that doing virtual dialogue, even if it's not too extensive, like a whole day or half a day, is actually worth to do it. Sharing knowledge and developing new accountability tools like the one that is going to be presented today by Andreas and by Ross is actually one of the things that has been very important during this pandemic situation, and it will help all our clients in their efforts in achieving good development outcomes. As you may be aware, while COVID has impacted pretty much every country around the world, the Latin American region has been particularly impacted the most. The multiple domestic and external shocks deriving from the pandemic will cause regional contraction by 7.2% in 2020. Bearing in mind that these challenges are really with us, it is imperative to measure the effects in the pandemic in the fiscal and the financial accounts. The governments and citizens need to understand the impact of the fiscal and monetary policy interventions and the overall financial position of the countries during and after the pandemic. We will see on the presentation today how the accounting profession is actually uniquely positioned to enhance the transparency and accountability of the public sector by providing advice and reliable estimates of the effects of COVID-19 in the fiscal and financial accounts. And this gives us a shared responsibility. No less important is the role of the Supreme Audit institutions in the oversight of public funds during the pandemic. Given the increased level of spending and the frequent use of more relaxed rules, especially on procurement, for example, this is very important to use this tool to be able to track expenditures and to speed up the acquisition of medicines or medical devices. The role of the SAIs is more important than ever for ensuring the accountability in the use of these funds, especially allocated to the COVID program. In Latin America and Caribbean, we had seen some good practices on this area, including, for example, the development of a specific internet website that presents relevant information for the citizens, such as the level in the execution of emergency funds and the audits that have been taken care of. There's also the example of using artificial intelligence by the Brazil CGU, or the Contraloría General del Estado, to track these expenditures, especially on the COVID program. I am very glad that really representing FOCAL today is going to be Dr. Pedro Borges, the General Accountant from Colombia. Kindly, he has agreed to make a presentation on how the country has dealt with the COVID pandemic from the perspective of the implementation of fiscal and monetary policies and how they have impacted their financial statements. Colombia, as some of you know, joined with Chile and Brazil and others, are one of the countries in the region that have actually adopted IPSAS. And recently, actually, more countries in the region are in the path to be compliant with ICSA. I really want to thank you, Mr. Borges, and all the FOCAL members for being here today. And I thank you all the PULSAR organizing team and the members for sharing with us the experience that David is going to be sharing with us today. To conclude, I really feel that this is just the beginning for a rich exchange of knowledge, and I welcome you all, and you'll be happy to stay for the whole hour and a half if there is any question on Latin America. Thank you so much, and enjoy the exchange. Thank you, Dimitri, and the rest.
Thank you, Xiomara. It was really good to see you with us this morning, afternoon. Now I'd like to invite Ross, our first technical speaker, to share some of the key features and benefits of the tool.
Thank you, Dimitri, and thank you for having me here today. Can everyone see my slides on the screen okay? Excellent. So I'm honored to be here today, and I'm happy to be speaking with the PULSAR and FinCoP communities and sharing a little more information about the COVID-19 intervention assessment tool that has been created in partnership with IFAC and ZHAW University, with IPSASB as a knowledge partner. I think it is an important time to speak about accrual accounting in particular, given the scale of the pandemic and its impact on the public sector, and in particular public sector finances, as well as the significance of the public sector at this point in time when the private sector is impacted so significantly by the pandemic and the shutdowns in many jurisdictions that are limiting economic trade in the business environment. Firstly, just to set the scene a little bit, I'd like to speak a little bit about how the IPSASB itself has been responding to COVID-19 and the impact of the pandemic. Similar to many organizations around the world, the IPSASB has been significantly impacted, with our operations being entirely virtual since March. Normally, we have several in-person meetings for our board meetings in particular, but also for outreach with constituents. And obviously since March, we've been operating entirely virtually, and for the first time have had to hold our IPSASB meetings in a virtual format, which really does change the nature and progress on the standard setting activities. But I'm happy to report we've now had 2 virtual meetings and several virtual outreach meetings such as this one that have allowed us to start to leverage technology and expand the reach of our operations and keep our work progressing on the IPSASB work program, which is also very important that we do continue our work to develop public sector accounting standards as more and more countries, such as many in the PULSAR and FinCoP communities, begin to adopt IPSAS or base their accrual standards on IPSAS. We also have adjusted our work program significantly to consider adding additional guidance and support related to the COVID pandemic. The first piece of guidance we put out was the COVID-19 relevant IPSASB accounting guidance document, which is a staff questions and answers document that is available for free on the IPSASB website, and it outlines the different types of government interventions that are being undertaken at this time broadly, and links that to the accounting guidance that already exists in IPSAS. So entities considering the impact of transactions on their financial statements know where to go in terms of the IPSAS guidance to start their analysis of those transactions. And the other document we've been involved with, a significant document we've been involved with, is the intervention assessment tool, which we'll talk more about in my presentation, and Andreas will build off of what I speak about and talk in further detail in his presentation. And the other thing we've really taken time to consider is the impact of the pandemic on our constituents, and then basically the understanding that at this time jurisdictions just need more time. We have 3 significant exposure drafts related to revenue and transfer expenses out for comment, and have been since February of this year. We initially planned to end that comment period in September, but we've now extended that to November to allow more time for constituents to prepare their responses and submit those responses to us. We've also decided to delay the implementation date of newly approved standards by an additional year. In particular, IPSAS 41 and IPSAS 42 were meant to be effective on January 1st, 2022. The board has now agreed to extend that for an additional year, so the new effective dates will be January 1st, 2023 for both of those standards, as well as a number of minor amendments. But early adoption is still available for those entities that want to progress their adoption on the initial timeline. And I'd also like to just provide one piece of feedback that it has been noted that the FinCoP community in particular has done a great job the last couple of years of preparing pooled responses to a number of IPSASB consultations in getting, I think, around 11 or 12 countries to develop their responses and have them translated in English and submitted to IPSASB. So I did want to note that that has been noticed, and it has been very helpful in making sure we get the Latin American perspective in our standard setting program. So I just wanted to give a quick thanks to the FOCAL network for their engagement with the IPSASB. So on this next slide, I just want to talk about the rationale for accrual a little bit and how it really links up well with the benefits of accrual and some of the impacts of the crisis. At this time, obviously, there's an extreme negative impact on public sector finances. In most jurisdictions, governments are undertaking record levels of debt and record levels of support for both the private sector and individuals related to the crisis. And that brings into focus more than ever the need for a true picture of public sector balance sheets and public sector financial statements, so that entities and governments know if they have the fiscal and financial power to continue to provide support to combat the pandemic, as well as future economic shocks when they might hit. The public sector balance sheet is now under stress more than ever in most jurisdictions. So it is troubling in some jurisdictions when there's a lack of good financial information to form the basis for decisions. Which links to the next bubbles here that I'd like to link. Again, the unmatched public sector support and the scale of public sector support, and the need for good information to support decisions. And Andreas in particular in his presentation will talk a little bit about the decision usefulness of the COVID intervention assessment tool and how that can help governments and public sector entities make better decisions about support they can provide by considering the impact now and in the future on the financial statements of governments. Also, Ziamaro touched on this a little bit in her introduction, but this really is a time when governments are giving unmatched support and spending like never before on the financial system, as well as the medical system and procurement to provide supplies. And that does kind of question the transparency and accountability of those making those decisions and ensuring that the support is getting where it needs to go and that it's as helpful as possible in making an impact. With this level of spending, obviously there's a risk of corruption, waste, and just pure mismanagement. The citizens and entities in each jurisdiction should really be looking to hold those charged with governance to account for their decisions. And that's one of the key benefits of an accrual accounting framework, is that you can actually see where expenditures are being spent, how they're being used, and make an informed decision if those making those decisions are really working in the best interest of everyone. And finally, that links to the lack of quality information. And we're seeing that in a lot of jurisdictions as the pandemic rolls out, that in some jurisdictions there still are large gaps, not only in financial information, but just government information used to support decisions. And again, accrual accounting brings reliable accrual data, which is audited. And that's an important aspect of the previous bubble, transparency and accountability, but also the reliability of data, is when you have a strong accrual framework, then your audit institutions also have something that's quality to audit against and to hold governments to account for. So it really is important, not only the accounting framework, but also the audit side of things, that you have that reliable data and it's accounted for and audited appropriately to ensure that the accrual information is providing a true and fair view of the public sector finances. And overall, this kind of links to a theme you'll see throughout this presentation that gave rise to the tool, but we're seeing a greater need now more than ever for accrual accounting. And there were concerns at the beginning of the pandemic that governments might lose momentum on their progress towards accrual accounting. And we really saw that as a really important risk and something we needed to address so that governments really don't take the opportunity with the pandemic to slow their progress on accrual accounting, which has been gaining momentum in the last few years, because the information needed at this time is greater than ever. So on the contrary to slowing the progress towards adoption implementation, this is the time when governments really need to embrace accrual and use the information to help manage this challenging pandemic. And that was really the problem that was trying to be addressed by the COVID intervention assessment tool is how can the IPSASB, IFAC, and others help governments that aren't yet on accrual in managing the pandemic? So what information, what tools can we provide those entities that really need the accrual information but haven't been through the whole process to adopt and implement accrual? And really what we came up with was this intervention assessment tool. And the thinking behind the tool was it will help governments understand the impact of the economics of the interventions they undertake. So they'll know the financial impact and they can account for those on an accrual basis, whether or not they're on full accrual yet or not, by applying IPSAS for those specific transactions. And that will give them an understanding of the scale and impact on the statement of financial performance and statement of public sector balance sheet, to ensure that they understand how much they're giving up in terms of public sector resources and what they're committing themselves to over the long term. And we thought that was a really important tool to provide, again, so that momentum on accrual isn't lost. And building off those interventions, governments can start to continue their move towards full accrual accounting. So what's in the tool itself? So the tool itself consists of a website that has the two documents you can see on your screen now, the COVID-19 Intervention Assessment Tool, which is the 5-step process that's been developed to help entities work through the thinking behind their interventions, as well as the financial impact on the public sector. And then the Pathways to Accrual document, which you can see on your right, which is meant to help entities and jurisdictions start to think about their pathway to accrual, regardless of where they are on the adoption implementation process thus far. And it highlights key considerations that jurisdictions will have to make in designing their plan to transition to accrual, and highlighting as well guidance that exists in the IFAC and IPSASB community that helps entities plan and manage their transition to accrual. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more near the end of my presentation. And the other key tool that's available for free download on the IFAC and IPSASB websites is the COVID-19 Intervention Assessment Tool spreadsheet that you can see a portion of the spreadsheet on your screen now, that really was developed, and the thinking for this spreadsheet came out of ZHAW, University of Applied Science, and Andreas Bergman's team that really did the thinking behind this on how to develop a decision support tool. So key types of government interventions can be explained in a simple format in terms of their impact on public sector finances, so that entities can really plan not only now, but in the future, by looking at how such interventions will impact public finances over time. And this spreadsheet is available for download and use. So it's meant to be a tool that entities, jurisdictions actually use to put their own numbers in and actually work through their interventions and their thinking as they plan them, as well as account for them going forward. And the spreadsheet has a tab that shows the arrows, so showing the direction of impact on a balance sheet, as well as examples with numbers, just to give people an idea of how it works. And I just again, I have to give kudos to Andreas and his team for the good thinking behind this spreadsheet. And having worked with it as we developed the tool, I think it is a great resource for entities to practically start to plan, account, and understand the impact on public finances of interventions in the assessment tool. Next, I want to highlight the 5-step assessment process that's covered in the intervention assessment tool. The first point I'd like to make here is, although it's 5 steps sequentially, you don't have to actually do each of the 5 steps together. That's really just a thinking process and the logic of laid out in the document. But you really could start with any of these steps in your planning process. And I would say the key to the 5 steps is really that before making a final decision, you've really worked through the various steps and considered the different impact. Each of the steps is meant to focus on a different consideration in planning and making an intervention and capturing the financial impact. But again, you don't necessarily have to start with step 1, but the key again was make sure that you do consider step 1 when you're planning your interventions, and you take a holistic view and understanding of the financial impact of one of the steps. And I also want to highlight here that there is a video available on the IPSASB and IFAC websites that kind of walks through in detail these 5 steps. So if you really want to go through a full example and you have a little bit of additional time, this is a great way to kind of see the assessment tool in action and how the spreadsheet and the different steps work in planning and managing an assessment. So I'm not going to go into detail given the time constraints today on each of the 5 steps as they're outlined in the document on this video. And I'm happy to have communication with anyone offline if anyone has any questions as they work through it and they'd like to connect with the IPSASB staff on that. And I do want to highlight one particular step that I do think is particularly important, and that's step 5. And really the thinking behind step 5 is if you've been through steps 1 to 4 and really understand the full financial impact of the COVID-19 interventions on an accrual basis, and you find that beneficial, step 5 is really about institutionalizing accrual so that you don't only have the accrual information for your COVID-19 interventions themselves, but you have the full public sector balance sheet and statement of financial performance on an accrual basis and the richness of information that it provides. This is, in my view, maybe the most important step, because what this step is really about is if you don't have that information now, is starting to build the plan today. The transition to accrual takes significant time and resources and political will. And it's not something that you can do in a short time period for most jurisdictions. And there are many considerations related to IT needs, HR capacity, the information needs of decision makers, accounting and audit that need to be planned, developed, and managed over a period of time. But the key from my perspective, and what I kind of want to end my portion of the presentation on, is if your jurisdiction doesn't have a detailed plan now on how to get to full accrual, the time to start is now. You might not get there in the next year or two, but to get started on the planning, start the process, and really start managing towards that goal is really key. And we're seeing that now more than ever with the pandemic and its impact on finances. That governments really do need this information to effectively manage public sector finances, and accrual should be a central part of any PFM reform project in today's climate. And with that, I'd really again like to thank the PULSAR and FinCoP networks for having me here to speak about the tool today. I think the World Bank's been doing great work in supporting these programs and the push to accrual. And, you know, we really are seeing that impact as we're working through another one of our important initiatives, the Public Sector Accountability Index, where we're tracking the progress to accrual. And you can really see that progress starting to come through in the PULSAR network countries and in Latin America. So with that, I just want to say thanks again. And at this point, I'll end my presentation and turn it over to Dimitri. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ross, for your presentation. Now I would like to invite Andres in his capacity of co-author of the tool to share with us some of the main elements of the assessment process. Please note that Andres is going to present in Spanish on this occasion as a courtesy for our FinCoP colleagues. So please change your channel from general flow to English in case you are not fluent in Spanish. Thank you.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues of the PULSAR region in Europe, Central Asia. Good morning for those of you in Latin America, and also good morning or good afternoon for the members of the World Bank. Thank you for the invitation to make this presentation on the tool. I would like to verify whether you have your presentation on the screen. I hope it is okay. The plan is to give you some feedback on how you do this analysis in the tool, and also give you a bit of an idea of the macroeconomic effect this could have regarding the financial situation. The issue is has to do with the interface between the fiscal policy and public sector accounting. So we are in this area of exposure between the two circles. We are talking about fiscal policy because these are fiscal policy interventions designed by the finance ministries in all cases, but they have consequences for accounting. However, a very important message is that this same tool can be used in the other sense. It's possible to analyze how we could change, for example, a policy proposal in order to have better outcomes in the public sector balance. So we can use this in both directions, as I said. To give you an idea, if you or your government support a private company or a state-owned company, let's say an airline, this can be done in several ways. You can pay a transfer, which is the easiest way, but maybe it's not a sustainable way uh, to a full extent. We can also have a loan to the company, and that can be seen on the balance compared to the transfer. And you can also buy or issue shares and buy them on behalf of the state, or you can issue financial guarantees. So there are several alternatives to support a company which is in danger of bankruptcy during this COVID pandemic situation. And there are several options for the design of the intervention. So it's very important to perform this analysis in both directions. Ross already spoke about the fact that it's an Excel spreadsheet, and we have several elements here. And I would like to present these elements. First of all, you have to realize that the analysis and the design must analyze not only the situation at the start of the implementation of the fiscal measure, but it's also necessary to analyze the effect at the end of the period. For example, at the closure of the fiscal period, the year, in the majority of the PULSAR and FOCAL members, this will happen on the 31st of December. And it's also very important to consider the effect in the next fiscal periods in 2021 and other years. So this Excel spreadsheet is designed to analyze the effects not only at a single point in time, but also over a certain period. As Ross mentioned, it is also important as a first step to analyze the amount of cash which is actually needed, because not all measures require cash. For example, if the government issues a financial guarantee, this guarantee would not require cash, at least not at the beginning. Maybe in the future this will change, but at the beginning it will not be that way. So in a first moment, you would not need cash. For example, this is different from the case of a transfer, which does need cash immediately. Of course, we could also analyze the difference in accrual accounting and in cash accounting. But this is something that is probably less important for those countries who are already in the process of implementing this in all regions. What is important also is to analyze the effects in the several elements of the financial statements. It could happen that we have effects on the assets, there could be effects on the liabilities, there might be other effects that have to do with cash or non-cash. For example, if the government buys shares, the non-cash part will go up. There could be effects on the equity and also effects on the revenues or the expenses of the government. And it could also happen that an intervention might have effects on disclosures. So it is important to analyze all these effects in every period that will be subjected to analysis. And it is also important to analyze the financing, that is to say, where does the cash come from for each of the periods? It could happen that the government has to lend money, issue bonds, or make loans. There could be other alternatives. It could sell other assets that are owned by the government, and the effect will always be different. But this effect could also produce changes in the next periods. However, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, it's possible to use the tool in the opposite direction. If you need a measure that does not require lending money at this time, we can use the tool in the opposite direction. We could analyze the type of measure that you have that does not require cash, the measure that does not increase the amount of the liabilities, or there could be a measure that has an effect on the non-financial assets. So we can also analyze the effects the other way around by designing an intervention, designing a measure that produces the desired effects. Now let me discuss the macroeconomic effects and what the use of the tool is. Up to now, in the Excel spreadsheet, we focused on the technicality of the work with the tool. However, does it have any effects or not? And at this point, it's important to realize that there are effects. It even has some very important effects for countries that still have not implemented the accrual basis accounting system. Manal Fuat, a division director from the IMF, said this: you have to do whatever it takes, but please keep the receipts. This is what she said. She stressed the need to keep all information that is required for accounting purposes. And in some cases, this is the first step for the implementation of the accrual system, because in some countries that do not have an accrual system, this could be the first step for the implementation of an accrual accounting system. However, we need to realize that the main objective of every fiscal measure, of every fiscal intervention, is indeed an economic effect, not an accounting effect. For this reason, it's very important that this economic effect be realized, be achieved. If we perform a company rescue operation for a company owned by the state, it's very important for that company to survive the crisis because it has the necessary resources. So this does not contradict the approach of the finance ministries. Uh, Normally, the macroeconomic teams also have to analyze how the support reaches the its destination, but we have to consider that there are different design options for economic interventions. It could be that we design these interventions according to the cash needs. There could be other alternatives through the acquisition of assets. It could happen that we have options that only reduce or mitigate risks, or there could be other options for financing without increasing the level of debt. So this is a very important message. There are several alternatives for the design of the tool, and the tool is based on or focuses on the options, and it analyzes the effects on the government's balance sheet. So what we also see in some of the studies we have performed at the IMF, the World Bank or the IDB, is that we design interventions in this way, and if we do so, it could happen that the balance sheet becomes stronger. So the effect of a stronger balance sheet is to have a more sustainable situation from an economic viewpoint for future generations, and it also gives us more capability to absorb future economic shocks, because we have learned that almost all countries are going into a second wave of the COVID crisis, and it could happen that there might be a third wave. So there could be the need for more interventions in the future. And if government has a very strong balance sheet, it will be in a better position to adopt the necessary measures. Finally, and to conclude, this tool allows us to analyze interventions, but it also allows us to design interventions. And for that reason, it is very important to have this tool for a more sustainable economic policy. Thank you very much for your attention. And let me say that I am also available to answer your questions in English or in Spanish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andres. Now you only have to learn Russian and we will be all set.
I will do my best.
Maybe for the next event. Our next speaker is David Gamkrelidze, who is going to present Georgian experience in assessing and reporting COVID-19 impact on public finances.
Hello, everybody. I hope you see my screen. Good. So I'm very glad to have the opportunity to see my friends, my colleagues from various countries. It is true that due to the pandemic, we are not able to meet physically, but still it's, I think it's pretty much possible to share our experience in an effective way in today's online world. So I'd like to thank the organizers of this event, and not only for planning, but also for inviting me to participate actively. So it is my pleasure to present today, and the presentation topic is how COVID pandemic affected and actually still continues to affect on public financial management in my country, in Georgia, I mean. So let me first start with the Georgian context.
David,
yeah.
Sorry for interrupting you. Could you put the presentation in presentation mode, like full screen?
Sure. Now you see it, right? Okay.
We see it. Yes, much better. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dimitri. So let me concentrate on the review of public finances in the context of Georgia. So we consider public financial management as a rule of as a chain of rules, systems, and processes, where the strength of the chain is limited to the strength of its weakest link. So that is why we strive to strengthen our PFM simultaneously in many different and interrelated areas altogether, such as, for example, accounting and reporting, efficient resource management, electronic system of treasury, and so on. The main ingredients of this process are to ensure comprehensive, effective, and transparent public financial management, and to ensure efficient and safe investment of public funds. Actually, those statements which I just mentioned are exactly the reflection of the mission and the vision of the Treasury Service as an institution, according to which we provide appropriate system for budget users to perform budget operations. We ensure transparency and reliability of accounting data. And finally, we develop appropriate mechanisms for public cash management. So those three areas which I just mentioned, they represent key considerations of Georgian public financial management, and they are subject to COVID impact at the moment. So let me provide further insight in terms of COVID implications in all those areas. I start with the cash management, most heavily affected field. Well, we all know the famous expression about, actually we had even separate session about the fact that cash is a king, which in fact is commonly used in a corporate world of investments to kind of recognize money as the most worthwhile asset worldwide. In the corporate sector, it is kind of a common sense that cash has become the king because of its paramount importance for overall activities of a business and for smooth functioning of the business. And in light with COVID-19 outbreak and the pandemic and the stock market diving thereby, we see investors' rising concern for the safety of their cash, and this topic has been actualized very much. The rationale, I think, is understandable as far as pandemic resulted in a substantially fluctuating prices on traditional instruments like bonds and stocks and commodities like gold, oil, rising treasury yields also, and sharp volatility on relatively new instruments and so on. So while being in the midst of crisis caused by the COVID, the rush into cash has been very intense. So while strong cash flow enables corporation to be more flexible in business decision making, no less intense is the management of liquidity in the government sector, and you would agree with me, I'm sure. Effective and efficient cash management is an essential ingredient for sound public financial management, as far as it enables government to fund its expenditure in a timely and proper manner. And wise cash management that much important. As reasons are the following: to ensure adequate cash is available to pay expenditure, as I already mentioned, to borrow only when it is needed, and to maximize government borrowing costs, to maximize return on idle cash by avoiding accumulation of unremunerated low-yielding government deposits, and to manage risks. Actually, those topics that I just mentioned are something that we are facing at the moment. I mean, we are kind of struggling with cash preservation and cash generation issues. As a classic black swan event, as it is sometimes called in economics, COVID-19 has led countries to very painful reality all of a sudden because of economic slowdown, because of closed businesses, decreased tax revenues, restricted access to financial markets, stressed society, increased social costs, and so on. The current crisis, not only for Georgia, but I think for all the world, is like uncharted waters, the depths of which is not being explored yet. So I mean, usually in critical situations, problems compile and one creates the other. And encountering these dramatically increased cash needs during the outbreak, key considerations for us, and I think for other governments as well, and cash managers particularly, include ensuring cash preservation and cash generation. Going forward, pandemic also affects us in terms of accounting and reporting as well. So particular topics of concern relate to the difficulties of appraisal. I mean the assessment of changes in the value of assets and liabilities, the extent of those changes, and also the extent of the provisions and contingent liabilities and contingent assets to be recorded. So application of IPSAS 19 becomes more challenging. Also, the government may write off certain liabilities, which will affect the level of contingent assets and liabilities, and so on. Another concern might be the assessment of the entity's ability to continue as a going concern within the existing conditions and existing budget. Also, having properly qualified human resources is always a challenge when it comes to large-scale public sector reform. And in a pandemic, when you become limited in your use of available human resources, this creates even more problems. The pandemic also poses a problem in terms of providing quality trainings, which we are doing before the pandemic. That should enable public sector accountants to prepare for accounting reform and the trainings that would guide them how to deal with certain sort of things in terms of accounting and reporting. So because of virus, countries, and including Georgia, are facing significant challenges. Actually, Georgia's response to COVID outbreak has been recognized as one of the most effective worldwide. The emergency response measures included the health sector, the support to support businesses and vulnerable people, to cover significant expenses of repatriating Georgian citizens, and so on. So the implementation of the response package would not have been feasible without adequate funds available. And in our case, Ministry of Finance did a great deal of mobilizing donor funding. The Treasury took a driver's seat in preparing accurate forecasts and adjusting to new reality. Facing intense rush into the cash, departments of the MOF and other government agencies have recognized how critical it is to have let's say, the accurate forecasts. And by the way, our forecasts have never been in such a huge demand among the Ministry of Finance and other colleagues. So well-established procedures and arrangements of daily consolidated forecasts of government's cash flow position, also active coordination with some internal, external, and international counterparties. availability of technical systems and platforms like TSA and RTGS. All these altogether helped our officials in the country to evaluate the impact of the current emergency situation and also to reprioritize its activities quickly to address those cash preservation and generation challenges which I just mentioned on my previous slides. Actually, there is a famous quote, what doesn't kill you will make you stronger. And at least one takeaway, what the current crisis has actualized is the need of proper mechanisms for managing government cash resources. This in turn involves the ability to forecast flows, to identify and place idle money into financial instruments, also to set up cash buffers and to have appropriate institutional arrangements and technical processes in place. So while being in the midst of crisis, hopefully countries better acknowledge the necessity of strengthening public finance management. And in order to continue progress, it is, I think, the time to set the bar high and to team up with local and international counterparties to reform the public financial management more actively. That's what we try to do. We strive to progress further, continue the implementation of IPSA standards, development of treasury system, cash management tools, instruments, and other topics related to treasury's day-to-day activities. And finally, I think any reform comes with its own cost. But what we have been assured so far is that if the strategy is tailored correctly to address specific promising areas, then the endurance and the resources invested in the reforming process might result in a, let's say, monumental undertaking. I think if lessons are learned properly by the countries, then the current chaos we are facing as a result of the pandemic might kind of turn into an opportunity to bring order to public financial management. So thank you very much for your attention, colleagues, and I'm ready to answer your question by the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, David, very much for your presentation. Now we would like to ask Dr. Pedro Bojorges to share with us Colombian experience. Dr. Bojorges is an old friend who is also a former FOCAL chair and one of the active members of the network. The presentation will be in Spanish as well, so please change your channels to English or the respective language.
Good morning. Good morning, Pedro. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. We do see the presentation, yes. Great. Now, could you put it in presentation mode, please? Can you see it now? Yes, yes, I can. Please go ahead. I bring you greetings from Colombia. Good morning, everyone. Good morning in Latin America. Good afternoon for Europe or Central Asia. I greet Drs. Daniel, Dr. Xiomara, everyone at the World Bank, and also a warm greeting to PULSAR, the whole work team, and also a greeting to FOCAL in Latin America. Thank you for this opportunity to address you as part of this important event. These are the different issues we're going to be discussing. Here's my outline. Yes, Colombia, as you can see on the left side of your screen, is part of South America and covers 1 million kilometers on the continent and has 2 coasts. Colombia has also been affected by COVID-19. Colombia to date has 855,000 citizens infected, 761,000 have recovered, 26,000 have died. And in today's situation of 34 million people infected, 24.6 of people recovered worldwide, and more than 1 million people who have died. Now, in view of the pandemic, Colombia has made major efforts. It has taken unprecedented fiscal decisions, and that has been done by all the countries of the world and countries of Latin America so as to provide a timely response to the pandemic. The pandemic has forced all countries to make major outlays and borrow, and that has an effect on our financial statements and the reporting provided by each country. Now, along those lines, Colombia, once it began to feel the effects of the pandemic, created an emergency mitigation fund that, in view of the provisions contained within the law, and also with some presidential decrees on the part of the government, this was possible. As part of this exercise, Colombia has seen that the Emergency Mitigation Fund is in charge of all of the resources that are part of the budget, as well as those resources provided by the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank. Now, what does this mean? It means that this is a fund that is being managed by the national government, where all of the resources have been pooled so as to deal with all of the effects that have been caused by the pandemic, the social threats, the economic effects, the financial effects, the cost to the country. And that has meant that there have been important developments, because in the government policy, that fund is the fund that feeds all of the state entities distributing the resources that are required to deal with the pandemic. Now, just like in other countries of the world, and just like in most Latin American countries, the allocations have basically been to address all of those issues having to do with global financial markets. There has been an impact on Colombia's economy. And one of the major impacts, and here you can see a whole list, a list that you can read on this slide, the effects on production, also a cut in supply chains, an effect on food supply. All the countries in the world are experiencing the same thing. Also, there has been an effect on revenue. Some stores, some businesses have had to be closed down. And that means that in the last 6 months, there have been changes to what had been planned by business throughout the country. And a major effect is the volatility of instruments, financial instruments in both the public and private sectors. And Colombia is a country that has a lot of tourism, and that has meant that tourism has had to be cut back, and that has had an effect on employability. Now, in the most recent report in Latin America, something like 34 million jobs were lost. And in Colombia, we have lost 3,965,000 jobs. That is an unemployment rate that was at 16.8. In August, it was 10.8. But the expectations of the government in these issues, you can see here on this slide, have to do with the policy implemented by the government in different scenarios for all the sectors of the economy. From the standpoint, we all went to the IMF, and the IMF says that for advanced nations, the debt has gone to 128% of GDP.
This is compared with the resources that were needed in a prior situation. We had 124 points of GDP. So we have had an increase. And all these macroeconomic effects in employability and all other issues that have an effect on the economy, the country has seen an effect on public accounts. We in Colombia manage public accounting, and the effect has been felt on the economy. So, in spite of the crisis that our country has suffered, and here you have the main effects, you can see that the confidence of investors in Colombia is still pretty high. There are commitments for 12.6, whereas 26.8 of those companies affected say they have still sufficient liquidity. So the fiscal deficit, which was originally foreseen for Colombia, which was foreseen to reach 3.2%, in 2020 will be more than 8%. And it had been foreseen as 2.2%. We had a new policy to redefine the framework for the fiscal rule, and this is an exercise that has an impact on the economy of the country. The effects on the monetary and fiscal policy of the country have combined, and the state has allocated resources for primary and secondary activities in the economy. And for us, it is very important to do so because the effects could reduce our resources to a great extent. So there has been a shift in public finances, and we have in our office, we have performed an exercise to help the distribution of resources. And this week, we have an RFP to allow for the presentation of the statement of accounts in 2020 in view of the effects on these statements in 2020. You know that in Colombia, we are now in the second year of reform of the fiscal practices. And if you see this graph on the left side, we have the guide that we are preparing right now, and it has the series of supports, aids that we have provided for, and the effects on most of the accounting statements, and also in regulatory bodies, because we have a higher level of debt, and we have a greater need for resources for government expenditure. So what have we done? Because I have to conclude now. We have given more visibility to public finances so that all citizens in the enterprise that we call Colombia can have access to public accounts, and we have a geo-referential system for public finances and public resources so that the citizens can know what their money is being used for. And we have also a report of information, a system for reporting information to consolidate all items of expenditure through a series of forms that have to be filled on all these expenses. With all these tools, we are doing better in Colombia. Thank you very much for your attention. And I want to thank you particularly for letting us make public what is public. That is a tool of the government at this point where we have a very serious pandemic situation. I bring you greetings once again from Colombia, from Bogota, and particularly for the PULSAR team and the members of the World Bank, the IDB, and the IMF, as well as all other attendees. I bring you greetings from Colombia, and thank you very much.
As usual, we don't have much time left, but I would like to invite Jose, Resk, and Juan Carlos Serrano to facilitate the questions and answer part of the session. A brief announcement as well. I would like to congratulate Srini on his promotion to the new position as head of PIFA Secretariat. As you know, Srinivas joined PULSAR family earlier this year, leading the education community of practice of PULSAR, and now we are going to miss his enthusiasm and creativity. Srini, thank you for all your hard work and collaboration during the past few months, and all the best in your new responsibilities on behalf of PULSAR team. We hope that you still can join us in a few minutes before you have to leave to your next meeting.
Thank you very much, Dimitri, and thank you very much, colleagues. It's a great pleasure working with all of you for past 8-9 months, and I look forward to continue the collaboration. And since I have the mic, let me also have a kind of a quick question, if it's okay with Juan and Jose. Can I go ahead with the question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thanks. So this is to David. So as you are working on the Georgia cash flow management and the financial reporting around it, what are the kind of issues that you saw on the sectors, particularly health and health sector, understanding the financial reporting? Most often it's like the availability of resources, but do they feel that the traditional PFM systems during COVID-19 have posed any difficulties to health sector in terms of accessing resources? And were the reports being generated by Ministry of Finance being treated as useful, and how we can build on that? Let me stop there. And great to connect with all of you. Thank you.
Hello, Srini. I'm very glad to see you. Actually, we had very interesting conference together with Srini a couple of months ago. It was to the topics related to the current one. So in those conferences and those topics all together, they complement each other, and they represent kind of a full picture. And in order to contribute to the full picture, I mean PFM in relation with the health sector. Let me say this way. So let me answer the question from Srini this way. Actually, in case of Georgia, the emergency response of our government, and especially in terms of health sector, it was to support businesses, to support vulnerable people, to cover significant expenses of repatriating Georgian citizens from abroad, also to fund the expenses to find shelter for thousands of quarantined people. So this implementation response package would not have been, feasible without adequate funds, which the need of which was not actualized before the pandemic. So the traditional ordinary public financial management system based on ordinary rules could not ensure all those funds readily available without, close cooperation with international institutions particularly, and with established rules and processes and established relationships with, not only international donors and institutions, but also with internal counterparties like banking counterparties, for example, like other ministries and so on. So what we have accomplished so far in that regard is that we have, different kind of scenarios, especially during the COVID outbreak. Those scenarios gained a lot of attention from many different stakeholders within the countries, and using those scenarios, we try to plan how the situation will develop, and we try to kind of customize the actions to those, the even most hardest scenarios. So finally, to kind of summarize my answer, our intention and primary intention of the public financial management system is in Georgia is kind of to be able every time to reprioritize your activities and your PFM areas according to the situation. This is what we strive and what we aim at every time. Yeah.
Thank you very much, David.
Dimitri, para el caso de Colombia, es muy importante.
Dimitri, in the case of Colombia, it's very important to say that the efforts of the government were geared to respond to the leveraging of the health sector with the aid of multilateral donors and private sector. We had a golden opportunity during this pandemic to support the hospitals of the entire territory of our country. We have 32 departments in our territory and more than 1,000 municipalities. We increased the number of hospital beds in the intensive care units, and the government set a series of parameters with a sort of with the different colors, red, yellow, green, etc. And once we were getting close to the green light, we began to set up policies to control the pandemics in the different areas of the country. In Colombia, we had foreseen more than 23,000 deaths due to COVID. Fortunately, we're now in a phase of the curve where the number is reducing, but we do foresee an increase after November because we have a greater mobility by people, and the government has allocated many resources to the health sector, and several countries in the world have also supported Colombia by providing equipment to help the health architecture of our country. Thank you very much.
And thanks, Rini. And I'm grateful and honored to take your place in the PULSAR EduCoP community and hope to fill your shoes. Well, we're gonna go with the second question. First, I would like to congratulate all the speakers. These presentations have been very interesting, and as it has been thoroughly emphasized today by our speakers, the benefits of implementing accrual accounting standards is more relevant than ever, and this is further evidenced by the actual crisis, right? There are many countries that have transitioned this path and can share with us lessons learned for communicating effectively with the decision makers, so it can be clearly understood that this is not only a pure accounting change, but it is understood in the broader context of improving public financial management and responding to user needs of information. So we would like to hear the thoughts of Dr. Bojorquez and Dr. Gamkredlitz from the Colombia and Georgia experiences. And then the next question will be done by Juan Carlos Serrano. Thank you very much. David, do you want to come first?
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, indeed, accrual-based information is something that provides invaluable contribution towards today's decision-making process, especially in the countries. Let me speak from the perspective of my country. I mean, from the context of my country, which is post-Soviet Union country, used to provide accounting rules and framework based on older rules, let's say, outdated rules, mainly concentrated on the cash budgets and cash-based information. So indeed, what the current crisis has shown us as of today is that only current and only past is not enough to be able to make certain kind of, correct decisions and comprehensive decisions about future development. One of our key directions at the moment in the country is exactly to implement IPSA standards, and that's what we are doing. At the moment, we have 24 standards in place, already adopted in Georgia, and we are continuing this process. Hopefully, we will finalize this process during coming years. We will adopt all relevant standards relevant to the current Georgian situation. And the aim of implementation of those standards is exactly to have the full picture. So together with cash-based budget execution reporting, accrual-based information, which will of course contribute in the decision-making, in the planning process in the country. And just to summarize, final words, we, as I mentioned previously, we are striving at having enough flexibility in the budget to be always able to reprioritize certain things over others. And again, to gain that kind of flexibility, you need to have understanding of the full picture. And in order to understand and get insight into the full picture, on top of the cash-based information, you definitely need accrual-based information. I think the modern world has acknowledged that, especially given the situation which we are facing at the moment because of COVID outbreak.
Thank you very much, David. Dr. Bojorquez, do you want to chip in?
No, pues agradecerle de manera especial a los organizadores.
I wanted to thank the organizers for the excellent presentations. And also I thank you for the contributions of David, Andrea, all of their experience. All of this brings knowledge to those of us who work in public finance, because countries, regardless of where they are geographically, in a time of crisis, need to help each other. Because countries in times of crisis have to continue to build on any weakness in their economies as they struggle to remain profitable. So Colombia has made a major effort, and we are rearranging our economy so as to be able to continue to grow at the same rate as other countries in Latin America. We have begun public works. They create jobs and help compensate for jobs lost. Also, we are working to provide health to our citizens, because people without medical care, obviously the productivity has to suffer. So the whole health system in Colombia is focused on the health of our people. And here the hope is that what we didn't do in the past, or what we aren't doing now, hopefully all of that can be corrected in the future. And we can increase productivity and we can revamp the country's economy. And I think that that has to be done in other countries of the world too. In the case of Colombia, the government has spared no effort, and it is providing subsidies to the private sector. So as, for example, to leverage that to support the most vulnerable sectors of our citizenry, but also support our businesses, giving them support so that they can pay salaries as well as the bonuses that are paid mid and at the end of the year. Also, we are trying to provide economic support to the livestock and agriculture sector, also to commerce and industry. So the country's economy, the government wants to strengthen our economy by supporting the primary sectors of the economy so as to reposition our economy and thus continue to move down the road to development for our country. Thank you, and greetings to you all.
Thank you, Jose, and thank you, everyone. This has been a very interesting event. We are very happy to join FOCAL and PULSAR forces today. And we have a question from our colleague, Maria Teresa Agüero. She's the General Accountant of Paraguay. And let me read it very quickly in English, and then I will read it in Spanish very quickly. The question goes for Ms. Dr. David and for Andreas mainly, but please feel free also to jump in case you have any comment for the other speakers. So the question is, why we always talk about the going concern in the public sector? We already know that if the entities have any type of loss or deficit, that might not mean that the entity will disappear. That is commonly or typically made by a decree or by an administrative reorganization. It is not like in the private sector where the entities could actually suffer or disappear. Well, muy rápidamente en español, la pregunta.
Now, quickly in Spanish, why do they always talk about ongoing concern in the public sector? We know that a deficit or a loss in an entity doesn't mean it's going to disappear. That would happen through a law or administrative action. It's not like in the private sector. And these entities continue to function.
Andreas, could please address this question?
Yes, of course. Let me just jump in and answer very quickly, and then I will ask Andreas to complement my answer with some regulatory perspective. So, yes, absolutely, I agree, Juan, with the author of the question about the fact that loss-making entity does not automatically mean the entities that will disappear and that will go bankrupt. So it's not kind of synonymous words, especially when we talk about the government sector. Well, when it is about private, it might be more relevant to talk about, but about when there is a government behind the organizations, ministries, or other spending entities, of course, the level of strength and endurance is a bit more than maybe in case of corporate sector. So again, it's not, those two terms are not synonymous. Definitely, I agree with that. So I mean, with the author of the question. On the other hand, this topic is being actualized more than ever at the moment, because any entity, including not only corporate but also the public ones, are facing huge problems not only just ordinary losses, but huge problems of maybe existence. Well, in some countries, those problems are more severe than in other countries, but still more or less those entities in different countries are facing problems. It might not be a problem of existence in case of Georgia, but still it is a challenge to overcome those maybe liquidity problems, staff-related problems, and so on. So in terms of accounting perspective, it is something that we have to think about, whether the entity can be still recognized as a going concern. And under that term, I mean that whether that entity can still continue its activity, maybe providing certain kind of goods and services, what it was supposed to do so within the current budget and within the current circumstances. So this is just one additional minor topic to consider when we are talking about the going concern from the accounting point of view. So it's not, it might not be that much severe as it might be in the private sector, but still I think that it is something we need to pay attention, especially when we are striving to adopt accrual-based information and accrual-based system of accounting in the country. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Muy brevemente en español, porque yo no sé si todavía sí.
And very briefly in Spanish, I don't know if we still have interpretation, but what Maria Teresa and David just said is that probably this is not fully relevant, and I agree entirely, but almost all countries have state-owned enterprises, and often those enterprises are a corporation. That is their legal format. So yes, they can go bankrupt. And here in Switzerland, for example, we have the problem with the National Railroad. And they are a corporation in terms of the way they were set up. And they are in a very difficult situation. So that is why the whole idea of an ongoing concern is relevant.
I think we have some constraints in terms of the timing. If you agree, we could continue with the event.
Thank you, Juan Carlos, Jose, David, Dr. Borges, Andres. Yes, let's continue. Actually, we are already running out of time. So I would like to ask Arman to proceed with the short closing of the event.
Thanks, Dmitry. Thank you, dear FOCAL and PULSAR friends and colleagues. I think that is good because with EGA and LUG connecting in one event, we may need a bit of more time. And despite of the distance between those two regions and those two networks, it demonstrates how similar our challenges are. And that is what we can hear from David and actually from Pedro on their objectives as well. And I would like to use this opportunity to thank Ross and Andres for their presentation and for the very useful tool they have presented. That is another demonstration of how COVID can benefit some side of COVID, and which triggers and which brings the value of accrual accounting back. And it clearly demonstrates what is the difference of accrual IPSAS versus cash accounting. And that we go, and actually all presenters were referring to accountability. It's about transparency. It's about decision-making. It's about effective running of the state. Of course, it's also linked to the quality of the information which is used. Reliable data for true and fair presentation of the public sector finance is a core. And here where we can see PULSAR and FOCAL countries have the similar objective. I would like also to inform or just remind that we are working on a PULS. It's IPSAS diagnostic tool, and I think that will to be developed by PULSAR, and I trust that will be very good link to the step 5 of the tool, just connecting and helping to transfer and institutionalize accrual IPSAS and improve quality of the financial reporting an accrual basis, which is a key element in the public finance management, including with fiscal management, fiscal risk management, and reporting. I would like, again, welcome Jose for joining us and for taking a very active lead on EduCoP. We'll miss Renee, but we will welcome Jose and look forward to your contribution. And again, I would like to thank our donors who are Austrian Ministry of Finance and SECO, who have been supporting our PULSAR program. And we look forward for our future collaboration with FOCAL. And again, thank you to all presenters, to moderators, and most importantly to all our participants for countries who are going to use it for the benefit of their countries. Thanks again, stay safe, and we'll be in touch. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Arman. We all hope to return to business as usual as soon as possible, so we could continue with our traditional face-to-face meetings. In the meanwhile, we are looking forward to see you soon online in our upcoming events. Thank you again for joining us, and please stay safe and have a great rest of the day. Thanks to everybody.